Welcome to Outrage Overload, a science podcast about outrage and lowering the temperature.
Let me proceed. Data from Texas shows that U.S.-born Americans commit more rape and murder than immigrants.
Listen, this trend of you all trying to get thrown out of committees so you can get on MSNBC is going to end. We're not going to put up with it.
This is my procedural right as a member of this committee.
You can go.
Enter documents
You can go with
into the
Mr.
record.
Frost and Mr. Green.
I'm reclaiming my time.
That's what you want. No.
Congress isn't just gridlocked, it's paralyzed. And the louder things get, the less gets done. Most Americans, roughly two-thirds, say our political system is too divided to solve its problems. The people who shout the loudest dominate our screens and our feeds. They get the clicks, the headlines, the campaign cash. Meanwhile, the quiet collaborators, the ones who actually govern, barely get noticed. We're rewarding division and punishing cooperation. And that's what we're going to talk about on this episode of the Outrage Overload podcast. I'm your host, David Beckemeyer, and our guest today thinks we can change that dynamic in Congress. And he's built a new tool to do it.
My name is Brad Porteus. I'm building something called Bridge Grades, which is essentially a report card for Congress. It's a project of the Mediators Foundation out of Boulder, Colorado, and I'm based in Redwood City, California.
Brad is the founder of Bridge Grades, a nonpartisan project that rates members of Congress based on real collaboration, from co-sponsorship patterns to rhetoric. He's bringing accountability and transparency to something we all say we want, politicians who actually get things done. In our conversation, we explore how this simple idea, measuring and celebrating the bridgers, can help us escape the outrage loop that's been holding democracy hostage. So stick around, because if you've ever wondered how ordinary citizens can actually change incentives in our political system, this episode might just give you hope and a plan. Let's hear all about it right now. Brad Porteus, thank you so much for making time to come on our show.
It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I am too. I looked at some polling. You may have seen it too, from the New York Times about people believe that our political system is so divided. I think it's a 64-33 margin. It's so divided that they don't believe that we can solve that the political system. I'm not talking about the American people, but I'm talking about the political system is too divided to solve its problems. And so I guess, from your opinion, why does having more representatives who are bridgers matter? In other words, how can it reduce that dysfunction in Congress? In other words, why should we care?
Yeah. Look, I think the reason that the polls are showing what they're showing is that Americans are recognizing that something's not working, and there's a lot of frustration around, well, how can we fix it and so forth. And it's been a lot of finger pointing at, people on the other side. There's been finger pointing at sort of the systems and so forth. The way I think about it is that the systems are sort of a little bit like stacked up against us. Like the incentives structures are just off right now. And the example really that I think a lot about is that when it comes to especially the legislative branch, there is so much polarization inside the legislative branch in terms of lawmakers. And what I mean by that is members of the House and members of the Senate that are so ideologically far apart that they're so busy infighting with each other that they're not really effective in doing what their core job is, and that is to write laws for our common interests and also act as a check and a balance against the other two branches of government. And so when you look at what's happening in our country right now, you have an executive branch that is testing limits on where powers sit, and you have a judicial branch that seems to be, in many ways, supporting that the power grab by the executive branch. Like our founding fathers had designed our system so that the legislative branch would act as a counterbalance to that. And I think what we're seeing right now is that the legislative branch is really not strong enough to be a great counterbalance. And why is that? And it's because of the polarization between both sides. And frankly, I think that we're busy in a game of tug of war that's unproductive and not really getting us anywhere.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned incentives there, because I think that's kind of one thing I'm trying to get at too, is that, and we've talked about this a lot on this show, that we, the voters, are the ones who are often rewarding these dividers, like for the theater and putting on the show, and at the same time we reward those people and put them back in office. Then at the same time we complain that Congress doesn't get anything done. So how much of the problem is sort of us
It is. I mean, I think the reality is like I sort of give us a bit of a hall pass on this one because I think we've sort of been tricked. The media and profit seeking social media companies and algorithms and stuff have sort of hijacked us to where we've become a little bit like almost pawns and puppets in the game. So obviously the social media companies are profiting from sort of the outrage economy, and politicians benefit from earning votes and earning power by being effectively loudmouths and getting a lot of media attention. And the media loves it because they get, clicks and they get headlines and everything else. So it's sort of like the system is set up to reward the ideological extremes. And there's also other things that happen systematically that also stack the deck against us as citizens. And those are things like gerrymandering and things like closed primary elections. And I think Citizens United has a role to play in this as well. So a lot of these things have all come together, and the resulting cocktail is that as citizens, we think that we are it's sort of in control, but reality, we've sort of been tricked. And I think one of the incentives that I have around trying to build what we're building with Bridge Grades is to offer citizens a different perspective in terms of being able to cut through the noise and look at the world through a slightly different lens. And the idea there is to say, well, we've been trapped and tricked into thinking that our whole world is really two-dimensional, and that's left versus right, or red versus blue, or Democrat versus Republican, however you want to think about it. Whereas what I fundamentally believe is that there's actually a vertical axis. It's not just left or right. If you could think of it like an up and down axis, which is one where we can begin to separate what we call bridgers from dividers. And that dimension is about sort of collaboration versus divisiveness. And the interesting thing that we're able to do is use third-party data to identify who those bridgers are and who the dividers are by looking at things like their legislative record and looking at the way that their rhetoric is. And so that ultimately the idea is to arm and empower citizen voters to know who's who. So we don't just look at somebody and say, oh, they're a Republican, therefore they're like this, or they're a Democrat and therefore they're like that. In fact, there's much more nuance to it than that. And what we want to do is tease out that nuance and to show the American people that within each party there are bridgers and there are dividers. And so we want to help them figure out who's who and ultimately break that little incentive cycle to where, right, because like right now, if you look at the list of bridgers and dividers and the bridge scores we have published on our site, all the Fs, the people with the worst grades and the lowest scores, they're all famous. I mean, everybody knows who they are because they're the ones getting all the media attention. If you look at the people who are actually getting the work done, the collaborators, I mean, I'm not intrinsically a political person, but I don't recognize any of the names of these people, to be honest. It's actually quite stunning. So you look at the people with the high scores and the A's, they're like, you never heard of these people. They're just like not even getting in the news at all. So the goal ultimately is to make them more famous and to shift the incentive so that people care a lot more about who the bridgers are and to begin to gradually dismiss who the dividers are.
Yeah, and sort of getting back to the first question, and maybe a nice little reminder for our audience too, is that getting back to the why does it matter that we have bridgers in Congress. I mean, one thing and I think you kind of hinted at it, and I just want to kind of elaborate on that a little bit more, is that our system is designed to make it kind of difficult to get things done on purpose, because we kind of don't. There's a bunch of reasons. They don't want majority rule and that kind of stuff, simple majority rule and stuff like that. So they make it kind of hard to get things done. And so what it requires is you have to go build a coalition to get things to happen. And when you're in this 50 plus 0.1% world, really hard to get anything done. And it requires bridging. And again, and the other piece about it making them famous maybe is trying to make them famous for better reasons. Like right now, there's so one thing is, you can maybe speak to that a little bit about, a little bit about sort of like constitutionally how our system was invented and meant to work. But then also there's this idea of talking about kind of if we can change these incentives a little bit. Right now it takes bravery. Like it's very hard to rock the boat and go be a bridger, right? You actually get flamed for it. Like you were even saying, like these people that aren't bridgers, the dividers are the famous ones. They're out there and they're getting on TV and they're the ones winning elections even, right? And again, you also mentioned gerrymandering. So I was also noticing when I looked at your map and who's rated low, many of those are in very gerrymandered areas where they basically can't lose, right? Or they almost have to be a divider to not be primary and stuff like that.
Right. Yep.
So I know I brought up a whole bunch of topics there, so I'll let you take that, whichever one you want to go in.
I'll cherry pick the things that come to mind immediately. I think one word that you said that really resonates is coalitions. And one of the things we do is we give points in our system to members of the Problem Solvers Caucus, which has 30 Republicans and 30 Democrats in the House. We don't have such a thing in the Senate, but if you're a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, then you earn points. And ultimately, it's a coalition sort of reward because, to your point, the design of our system is to build coalitions, and sometimes they can be really unlikely coalitions, and those sometimes are the best ones. But I think that's become less and less common over a period of time, and I think we're suffering because of that lack of coalitions. But I think the other thing that you said in your comment and question there that got my attention was this notion around bravery, because what you're saying is exactly right, and this goes back to the incentive. The perverse incentives we have. I mean, we talk about representative government, and ideally, the design of our government was that these members of the House, especially, and senators too, they're supposed to represent the interests of the people that they represent, but they tend to represent the interests of only their party. And this is one of the problems that we have because, like, as you already mentioned, the risk is that if you don't play ball, then you get sort of fingered by your own team, your own tribe, and then you get risk of being thrown out. Unfortunately, now politics has become a career, not a stint of social service or civic service that it once was, hundreds of years ago. So there's so much at stake and everything else. So people have incentives to be team players within their party, or to be like deep-throated advocates for their majority in their voting districts, right? So in both cases, the incentive is to not bridge. And so the result of that is that when we look at our systems, one of the things we do is we offer a sort of what we call a degree of difficulty score. So a little bit like a gymnastics or platform diving, where if you do a harder trick, you get a multiplier effect. We offer a little bit of a multiplier for people who are representing hard-leaning districts or states. And the notion there is that it'd be easier not to bridge, right? It'd be easier not to write legislation that gets sponsored by the opposite party, or to sponsor bills that are written by the other party, or to talk about bipartisanship. And so if the people who do those behaviors, we give them a little nudge and a little bump when they're in these hard-leaning districts for the exact reason you mentioned, which is that it takes courage and it takes bravery to swim against the tide.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about somehow shining a light more on some of these quiet problem solvers. How are you actually doing that? Or what? Maybe you have some ideas for prospectively how we can do that.
Yeah. So I guess what you're asking sort of is, well, then how does it play out in terms of changing the incentives? Is that fair?
Sure. Yeah. In the bigger picture, yeah.
So it's a great question. When I got into this project, and I'd say it kicked off about 18 months ago. My initial insight is that we needed two things in order to change incentives. And again, this is all about how do we change the incentives of behaviors in the legislative branch. And the two things were, one is a reliable, credible, trustworthy method to identify who the bridgers are versus the dividers. And that's what this grading system is all about. And that's what you and I are talking about today. The second part that has to be part of this is then carrots and sticks that are actually important enough to voters and to especially politicians to actually change behaviors. Because if you just have a measurement system by itself without any impact around it, then it's interesting, but it's not really impactful. So I initially thought, well, okay, the thing that needs to happen is build this trustworthy grading system, and then also simultaneously recruit citizens, particularly people who are on the sidelines from civics, and invite them to rejoin civics and to say, hey, I commit to voting for bridgers over dividers no matter what, and to build a coalition of voters. And the big dream was like maybe 2 or 3% of the population could be enough to nudge just enough elections to slightly shift the composition of the legislative bodies, and change the culture, and gradually sort of create a little tipping point. What I've subsequently sort of concluded is that both of those are still needed, but my emphasis and focus is on the first piece and not yet on the second piece. So the questions then become, well, how do we make sure that the second piece ends up happening? And that will be interesting to see. And this is something that I look at through the lens of, I think this is a multi-election cycle process. I see this as like a 4 or 5 election cycle process, which sounds like a long time, but is realistically 8 to 10 years. And as you and I both know, I think we're sort of the same age. 8 to 10 years goes like that in many ways. And so an example of this would be like, it's not unreasonable to think that a PAC could be organized, a Bridgers PAC could be organized. And what that would look like would be people who are concerned citizens like me, who have access to donors, who raise a fund and essentially donate money to Bridgers who are in difficult elections, make sure that they get reelected, and then find dividers, people who are getting Fs, and make sure that they lose in their reelection bids. And if we can continually and systematically reelect As and vote out Fs, then you're going to change the composition of these bodies in a way that's going to be positive towards depolarizing these legislators, which I think will ultimately create a culture of collaboration by rewarding that collaboration. And, and the big dream is like, well, maybe it shifts a little bit of the culture of our country because we're so, we're so tribal based on what's happening on Capitol Hill.
Right. Yeah, we focus way too much on what's going on nationally. And I think another thing, and I don't know if you've thought about this and if you have any thoughts on it, is like, I think there's a lot more people like you, right? You talked about that you're sort of center left, but you're not necessarily a fan of the Democratic Party and aren't in lockstep with them. Yet somehow you're still here. Like, it's kind of overcoming that fear some of us have that I can't say, there's, I guess, a little bit of plural ignorance about it, right? We think everybody else is in lockstep maybe with our party or, the closest thing that's to our party thinking anyway. And so we don't say the stuff that like where we're one of these people with these cross-cutting ideas and think collaboration's important and all that. And we kind of think nobody else thinks that. So I wonder if there's another opportunity to kind of highlight these people, both voters, so you don't have to be afraid. We as citizens don't have to be afraid of it, but also the politicians. Like, find those Bridgers and then say, look, they're still here. Like, they didn't lose their election with these, even though they did this.
Yeah. I love these questions. It's a great point. So let me start with the second one first. I think from the politician's perspective, the dream would be to be able to say, well, now the politicians who want to collaborate, build coalitions, they know where to look. Because they can just go onto bridgegrades.org and they can see for themselves who are the ones who are most likely to take that call and to try to find something in common and to make something happen. So in some ways, it's like giving them a chance to find each other without them having to say, oh, I'm part of a third party or I'm independent. They can still be full-throated in their ideological beliefs, but they can also be seen as pragmatists. Like, so sometimes I think about this as dogmatic versus pragmatic. Well, we're trying to help find the pragmatic people. And we're also, by the way, very importantly, we're not suggesting to people that they compromise or that they find themselves in the middle or all of this kind of thing. Decidedly not. So I want to be very clear that while it would be fantastic to get more representation towards people who are more centrist, because it's lacking, we know that, this isn't about saying to somebody who's ideologically strong on a certain position to say, you now have to change and compromise your positions or values to be a bridger. You don't. You only have to be willing to work with people from the other party and find something of common interest. It doesn't mean you need to change your own beliefs. I'm 1,000% confident that if you get two people in the room who have the widest ideological differences, they're going to find things in common. And a great example of that was Josh Hawley and Bernie Sanders earlier this year co-authored a bill to cap credit card interest rates for consumers at 10%. Josh Hawley and Bernie Sanders, the Venn diagram of ideological overlap is like a crescent moon. I mean, it is tiny. But guess what? They found each other on a topic that they both believe in and their constituents also care about, and they did that. So it's that kind of thing that we need a lot more of. It's way too easy to find things that we don't agree on and fight about those and get nowhere. It's a lot more challenging and compelling to find those areas of overlap. I think pluralism is a really important part of this. And I mean, it's a fancy word, it's a wonky word, but basically all it means is that America is strongest when we embrace the fact that we have a wide range of ideological differences. So the trap we've gotten into as a country and society culturally is that we've been so busy trying to convince the other side they're wrong and justify that our side is right, that we've forgotten that actually the original origins of our country was, these 13 colonies, which were extremely different in the ways that they lived and culturally, and they accepted that, and they didn't bother trying to, the people in Virginia didn't bother trying to tell the people in New Hampshire that they were right or wrong about stuff. I mean, they may have not appreciated it, but you could move, you can live different ways. And accept that there's different ways of living. And I think we've forgotten that in our country. And we're so busy trying to quote unquote, unify our country by everybody believing the same thing that, I mean, it's just, I don't know how we got there because it's a fallacy. And what would be amazing is if we could get back to saying okay, we have a ton of disagreements about how we want to live, but that's okay because that's what America is. And there are areas of overlap of common interests, and let's focus on those as opposed to focusing on what differentiates us.
Well, and as you said, an important thing to remind us of is that we often kind of forget because everything is kind of painted rosy color in textbooks when you're going over this stuff. But the founding fathers, they didn't agree. There's a lot of stuff they didn't agree about.
Yeah.
And they came into a room and found ways to put things down that they could sign off on. And that's one reason why we have some odd compromises in there as well. And we've been sort of working on those compromises. But that's one thing they did right was they created a system that could evolve over time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this is, to tie it back to to bridge grades, I mean, this is actually one of the big motivations that we're using as we build out the rubric, the system to sort the bridges from the dividers is to use objective third-party data to identify who's actually doing that work and based on behaviors, so observable behaviors, as opposed to the narrative that media feeds us about who's doing a good job and who's not doing a good job, which is all extremely subjective. And I'm not here to say that our system is without subjectivity. I don't think there's anything in life anymore that is, but we aim to be as objective as possible and explicit about how everything works. So everything's completely transparent and open source, and our code is all available on GitHub and everything else, which basically means that if anybody wants to challenge sort of the methods we're using to create these scores and grades, not only do we welcome it, but we encourage it, because the goal of what we're building is a bit like a Wikipedia style model, which is to say that this is a citizen-led initiative. We want citizens to engage in it. We want citizens to challenge it and come back with, hey, have you thought about adding this data set, or, the way you weigh rhetoric analysis versus legislative record that's too much or too little, or I can't believe you give a centrist bias adjustment data. Great. If you have a better mousetrap that you want to propose, bring it on, and here's how you present it. And we're all about constant improvement. So, you and I are talking now in the fall of 2025. It'll be interesting to come back and listen to this conversation, in 2 years from now, and hopefully things will have really evolved and continue to develop in a way that sharpens these systems and brings greater transparency and trustworthiness into it, which I think is really important as we enter a post-truth world. I mean, it's a scary time where it's really hard to even agree on basic facts. And so, I feel like this is the right time to begin to create a system that hopefully has durability over a period of time and gives citizens real access and line of sight into objective data on how our congressional leaders are performing. And this absent of this sort of the narrative, especially now that we have lack of trustworthiness in institutions and in media.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that transparency is such an important part of that. If you say, we sort of looking at that, we're living certainly in a post-trust world for sure. That's how you build trust, I think, is you have that transparency, right? And I love that you mentioned that, because I forgot about that part of it. So, it's easy to find. You can just Google bridge grades, right? But what's the website?
Bridgegrades.org. But yeah, you can find it just searching bridge grades. Yep.
Yeah, and I like that it's very easy to use, and it's not it's not overly wonky to kind of figure out what you're looking at. So I do like, at least, I don't know, I didn't think it was. So I thought that was great. So
well, that's great. I think just one of the things that I built, one of the ways we built it is because I sort of built it for myself, because one of the things is like when I'm reading the news and I see an article that's referring to somebody who I don't know who they are, then the first thing I do is I go to bridgegrades.org and I use the search bar at the top and I search their name, and then I'm like, oh, that person is a low C. Okay, so now, that gives me a little perspective on where they may be coming from, or they might be a flat out F, or they might be an A, and so it gives me like a second data point or a lens to try to make sense of it, because we all know now we have to be incredibly cynical and skeptical of what we read or hear about in the media. And so, when it comes to, what does this mean or what can you do? My number one encouragement to people is just like, get in the habit of, when you see coverage about somebody, just pop over to bridgegrades.org, do a quick search, and then you see where they are on this spectrum. And it will, it will shed some interesting light on whatever it is that you're reading or hearing about that particular congressperson. So yeah, I think in any case, we do want to recognize and reward the people who are doing the heavy lifting, and to try to make them a little less anonymous. But it will take time.
Yeah. Well, no, I think that's a great goal. Like you say, like the ones that are in there and they might be a little bit at risk. Yeah, we should try to support them as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that comes up for me when we talk about that dynamic is, people who are listening can draw their own conclusions, but what I've learned is that people who are active in civics, and I think probably your audience is very active in civics. And what I mean by that is they vote, right? And they're members of parties and this kind of a thing. I've found that the reactions I get to this work I get a lot more challenges from people who are partisans. And I always love that, because I think, if the parties hate this and partisans hate this, then we're onto something good now. Because it means that there's something there. Where it gets interesting is, there's all the data, and you've seen a lot of it yourself. You probably talked about it on the podcast, but there's, Gallup does a survey every month. 43% of Americans identify as independent first, and then they splinter off into leaning left, leaning right, and then truly only 8% of people consider themselves totally independent. But the first question, 43%, that's a huge block of people. But hey, where are they, right? And a lot of them are just not voting, right? They're like, I hate both parties. There's no point in voting, et cetera, et cetera. And where I think this has a lot more impact is not to change anyone's mind. If you're already active in civics, you're already a partisan member of a party, you're voting, it's very unlikely you're going to look at bridge grades and change your vote. But if you're on the sidelines and you're like distanced from civics and you're not that interested in this, that, or the other, but somebody were to say to you, hey, you should vote. And by the way, if you vote for people who are A's and B's, these are the people who are looking out for our common interests. Just don't vote for a C or an F. And people, I think that's not unreasonable to think that over a period of time, we can energize even a small block of voters who have been on the sidelines. And I think, as we know, sometimes these elections can be so tight that, that can make the difference. And then, gradually change the composition of these bodies and gradually change the culture.
Yeah, well, I'm on board with that. Let's see if we can make that happen. I hope it does happen. I think that's a great way to look at it, because a lot of people are looking for like the magic silver bullet will change everything this month or something. But I think you have to look at it in that way. And I do think if we look at the elections, right, what's the biggest voting block? The non-voters. It's way more than the voters.
Yeah.
So there's lots of opportunity there.
Can you believe how much and how much money? Oh my God, how much money is being invested into these districts that are close? And to try to get the independent voter to come out and vote for your guy or your woman or whatever, it's just insane. So again, money comes in and adds a lot of complexity into this. And I think this is, I see this again. Sometimes I feel like I'm a little bit myopic or Pollyannish, or like naive, let's call it. But in the end, like, come on, this is a citizen-led initiative to try to protect the citizens from special interests, whether it's party, whether it's big money, whether it's gerrymandering, whether it's, Citizens United, all this type of stuff. As you started at the beginning of the conversation asking about citizens and have we created this ourselves? We have, but it also means we have a way out, right? And we have to then sort of realize we're being tricked in all these other dimensions and to let go of the rope, the tug of war rope, and then say, wait a minute, look around and say, hey, what's actually happening here? And that's the hope we can begin to, because I think people are fed up, by the way. I think people are fed up with the partisanship and the never-ending game of tug of war. I mean, it's a good distraction from the pain and suffering of life, but it's annoying. It's too much.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, everything you're saying just resonates with so many of the listeners that I've spoken with. Like, I could just hear them going, yes, this is what I've been talking about. Right. So I love it. I love it. So Brad Porteus, thank you so much for making time for our program.
I really appreciated the conversation, and thanks for some really great questions.
Thank you. That is it for this episode of the Outrage Overload podcast. For links to everything we talked about on this episode, go to outrageoverload.net. If something in this episode sparked a thought, or maybe even lit a fire, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a voice message or even schedule a quick one-on-one chat right from our contact page at outrageoverload.net/contact. If you found this episode valuable, please share it or leave a review. It really helps. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.